Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be featuring the Shikishima, formerly known as the Yashima, the Tier 10 Yamato with the 510mm guns. Before I get into this ship and honestly huge caliber guns to begin with, I do want to highlight that I have drawn the winner of the Mines giveaway, and it's a guy called Scuttlemuz Extra on the EU server. I posted a vid on Twitter of the drawing process, so no one can claim any shenanigans regarding the draw. I will be doing a couple more ship giveaways on my YouTube in the upcoming days, weeks, because, well, I am obviously trying to drive that 100k sub count so that I can do the big 100k celebration as well. Moving on, Shikishima. It is very basically a Yamato, with some small differences besides the guns, which I will get into in just a bit. The Shikishima handles slightly better than the Yamato. It has about a 4-second faster rudder shift, but considering that still leaves it at an 18.7-second rudder shift, that's not particularly impressive. It does somehow magically have a less secondary range than the Yamato, even on the same secondary guns, the 155s. And the reason for this, I think, is that during testing people figured out that the secondary guns can actually be really effective with the right build, so Wargaming kind of just completely nerfed the range on them. So now the secondary range is only 6.6 compared to Yamato's, I think, 7.7 with the flag. So no longer in any way viable, even though Shikishima as a secondary platform was already pretty questionable considering Yamato's extremely vulnerable citadel. So that's one difference. I do think Shikishima does have better secondary DPM. Regardless, I've tried secondary build on the ship and it's basically a meme, completely useless. The other difference is that even though Shikishima gives up some secondary range, in return it does get significantly better AA. Not enough to actually actively deter any tier 10 carrier planes who don't fly straight into your flak. It's still a significant difference, especially against tier 8 planes. Yamato, of course, being infamous for its poor AA, Shikishima does have significantly more. Those are really the only changes between the only differences. The other main difference is, of course, the guns. Besides that, there are no other real changes between this one and the Yamato, so this thing is pretty easily comparable. So what you have is on the Yamato, if you are running, if you run the reload mod, you have 26.4 second reload. If you run the legendary, you have 28.2. In comparison to Shikishima, you can't run legendary, so obviously you run the reload. You have a 23.8 second reload. So 26.4 versus 23.8 or 28.2 if legendary. Of course, legendary on Yamato is fantastic. In return though, you lose a gun on every single turret and you gain 510mm guns. The turret traverse is basically identical, which is glacially slow, 69 seconds without a captain on the Shikishima. Obviously you do spec expert marksman on it for obvious reasons to help alleviate this issue. The alpha is significantly higher. It's been bolstered up to 19.4k on the Shikishima in comparison to Yamato's 14.8k alpha. However, considering you're missing 3 whole guns, this really isn't enough to make up for it. In fact, there's no real values that you're overmatching either, because, well, the thing is, Yamato's guns are infamous, or in the game they are extremely powerful for the simple reason that the simple formula of calculating overmatch goes, you divide the caliber by 14.3 and you get a value, and that value is what armor you overmatch. For example, if you divide Republic's 430mm guns by 14.3, you end up with a number that is 30.0 something, which means, of course, that the Republic overmatches 30mm of armor, which is very relevant because that's most of the tier 10 cruiser armor. In this case, Yamato is unique in World of Warships because that is the only battleship that overmatches 32mm of plating, which is most commonly seen on, for example, Yamato Nose that I just overmatched, or most other battleships. There are, of course, exceptions to this rule as well. That's why Kremlin and Thunder and Ohio, all of these have 457mm guns, or why it's significant that they have 457, because they cannot overmatch this 32mm threshold. So what exactly does adding 510 instead of 460mm, adding another 50mm to the caliber? Well, honestly, nothing. It means that instead of overmatching 32mm plating, you can now overmatch 35mm of plating in the Shikishima. And this means that you overmatch armor like Fuso deck armor. And that's pretty much it. I'm sure there are some 35mm platings in the game, but in general in tier 10, tier 9, tier 8, basically the ships that you will face in the Shikishima, this additional overmatch is completely irrelevant. There is really nothing that you benefit from. If a Yamato can punish it, well, then so can a Shikishima. There is really no difference. The difference is in situations like this, if you only land a couple of shells, well, I sure wish I would have had Yamato's guns there with some additional HE power instead of just having 6 guns. In general, the trade-off has been poor for the Shikishima. You just don't gain enough firepower for losing all those barrels. And I do have some big issues with the dispersion that I will get into in just a bit. Although the Overmatch actually doesn't provide any benefits. In fact, looking at the armor penetration, the benefit is also extremely minimal. At 20 kilometers, a Yamato can pen 500mm of armor, roughly. At 20 kilometers, a Shikishima can pen roughly 525. Or maybe even 500 and... no, honestly it's 525 about. So what you're gaining at range is about 25mm of additional armor penetration when shooting flat broadsides. Well, shooting anything really, but you're not really going to see the effects, and in fact I had a really hard time telling when I was actually getting any sort of benefit of that incredibly slight additional armor penetration. So, no real overmatch, no real penetration. The shell arcs are exactly the same on the Yamato, but this is of course where the issues start to get mixed in. This ship is supposed to have some sort of unique special dispersion. I've looked at it and I can't help but suspect that the Shikishima has exactly that same poor vertical dispersion that the Yamato has. Now, vertical dispersion. Flamu, what the hell are you talking about? What is a vertical dispersion? Well, what you see in game, the value that you see in game when you hover your mouse over your guns, that's the max dispersion. That's actually your horizontal dispersion. Basically, how wide do the shells go? That is not the actual dispersion how the shells land, because there's something else that is significantly more important, and that is the vertical dispersion. In fact, I'm gonna put up this extremely useful picture that shows you what the dispersion ellipse, basically the area where the shells land, what it looks like when you're shooting at an Iowa at 18 kilometers. There you go. The line G, aka that cross at the bottom, represents a broadside Iowa sitting at 18 kilometers. Now that blue line, aka the D line, that is Yamato's dispersion at 18 kilometers. And as you can see, even though it looks like the horizontal dispersion is quite tight, the vertical dispersion is 123 meters, which makes the ellipse significantly wider than all the others. The Thunder only has a 90mm, and the Thunder, 90 meters, sorry, and the Thunder is of course the green line. So you can see obviously how much that affects how high or low the shells land. And then of course we have the red line, which is the Kremlin, that is the C line. It looks like the dispersion is poorer, because, well, in the stats we see that it's the number is higher, but when we look at the actual vertical dispersion here, we can see that because the Kremlin has such a low vertical dispersion, in fact Kremlin's vertical dispersion at 18 kilometers is only 82 meters, versus Yamato's 123. So we can see what happens is that the so-called poor dispersion that we like to meme about allows the Kremlin to much more consistently land citadels at long ranges, because, well, the shells are not splashing in front of the ship and they're not splashing behind the ship, but they're generally splashing on the broadside and quite often on the citadel. And we can also see Slava, a ship that it was infamous for just how incredibly broken it was. you can see that it's basically just a narrowed down Kremlin dispersion. And on paper, Thunderer's dispersion is better than Slava's. But because Slava has that incredible vertical dispersion, that's why you were scoring such a ridiculous amount of citadels on that. In fact, you can go back and look at one of my old Slava Pobeda vids and just look at the shells when they fly through the air. You'll note that they basically spread out like a line. There's a fair bit of horizontal dispersion, but the vertical dispersion is very, very tight. And looking at Shikishima's dispersion, I am very worried that it suffers from Yamato's vertical dispersion. I haven't seen any numbers, I haven't seen any data mines, so I can not in any way confirm it. I'm only going based on my own experiences, which is that the shells very often tend to go up and down based on where I'm aiming. And Yamato compensates for this in a variety of ways. First of all, 9 guns. Second of all, legendary mod. You run the normal dispersion mod and then you run the legendary mod, and Yamato's dispersion gets tightened up significantly, and it even compensates by throwing out 9 shells. On the other hand, Shikishima doesn't have this, and you end up where shells landing either on the belt and getting bounces, or landing above him, or on the superstructure getting overpens. The vertical dispersions, the shells go too high, too low, too often. And I've noted that this has become a very, very common issue. You're gonna see, I'm gonna call out some really obvious examples of this poor vertical dispersion really, really missing with any of the hits that you're trying to get. And now this is especially a huge problem with the Shikishima because, well, when you're nosing in a situation like this, you can't use all the guns. Because if I try to use my back turret, then I open up that front citadel weakness that the Yamato hull is so famous for, and the Musashi and so forth, that you end up in these situations where you have to go only nose in. And having only 4 guns to shoot with, having slightly faster reload, doesn't compensate for the fact that you're not really hitting much. And you're not doing a whole lot of damage, especially on these tanky angle targets where improved dispersion is so very important, and you don't want to see volleys like that. So Shikishima in its current state, I can in no way recommend it. And then of course we also have to highlight the question of, do we really want another overmatching ship in the game? I don't know if you guys are aware of it, but there's 9 tier 10 ships, 9 tier 10 battleships in the game right now. 5 of these ships overmatch 30mm. Now 30mm armor is the armor that's on basically all the cruisers. Well, not quite all, there are of course exceptions, but I mean Zhao upper belt deck, Yoshino upper belt deck, Des Moines upper belt deck, Worcester deck armor. It's everywhere. Basically every single cruiser. Henry upper belt deck, Venezia upper belt deck, Hindenburg upper belt deck. These are all 30mm plating. And right now, of the 9 tier 10s, 5 of them overmatch this armor. And overmatch means that you can't bounce the AP. If it hits, it's gonna punch through it like butter. Overmatch basically means that the caliber is so large that it ignores the armor and goes straight through. And there was a time when the game only had Montana and Yamato, and then the German battleships came in summer 2016, and basically you'd have the occasional Yamato that was the threat, but in general cruisers could angle against battleships, and if they angled and positioned correctly, you weren't just evading shells, but you could actively even tank shells with good positioning and good sailing. Then Conqueror came out, but 457s were crap. Everyone ran the other guns, but people mostly shot HE. Ultimately, it didn't have that big of an impact. Musashi came out early 2018. Then Republic came out also early 2018. Now it started to get a bit awkward. We were starting to see a fair bit of overmatch. But then last year is when Wargaming really turned up the throttle. We had Kremlin in May, Georgia in June, Ohio in September, Thunder I think also in September, and suddenly we were in the situation where we are now, where playing tier 10 in a cruiser, even if you're facing tier 9 battleships, it might be Georgia's, Musashi's, stuff like this that just straight up ignore your armor. And now Wargaming wants to add even more of this. In fact, one of the reasons why this whole Des Moines rework, where they buffed, or not Des Moines rework, but basically the armor rework, an IFHE rework, where they buffed Des Moines armor from 27mm to 30mm, one of the reasons that it did so very little and affected so very little was because, well, not a whole lot of battleships cared about the difference between 27 and 30mm armor to begin with. It had some impact, sure, but the actual impact, very hard to notice. And now we're getting yet another matching battleship. In fact, if Shikishima is added, then we're gonna have 10 tier 10 battleships. Of these, 6. That is Republic, Kremlin, Ohio, Thunder, Yamato, and now Shikishima. All of them will completely ignore all cruiser armor. And it's kind of silly, like in situations like that. Okay, that was some overmatching nose, maybe overmatching deck armor. It doesn't really matter. You just point at the cruiser and you click. It doesn't really matter what he does. He's still gonna get blapped. And I don't like this development. I don't like all these additions of these overmatching guns, because I remember back in the day when with good play you could greatly mitigate hits, you could push in, you could do aggression, but the more we play... Oh, here's a good example, by the way. Full broadside Montana, 11.2 kilometers. Look at that vertical dispersion. You saw that? The horizontal dispersion wasn't bad. It landed basically all around the center of his ship. But the vertical dispersion made half the shells land behind him, half land in front of him, and the actual damage with only 6 guns, very, very underwhelming. And that's exactly what I've been highlighting with this issue, with this dispersion. It simply isn't tight enough. Yamato needed the legendary upgrade to escape the issues of power creep that were really quickly catching up to it. And Shikishima, I'd like to say that honestly the dispersion needs to be narrowed down a bit for this ship to be anywhere remotely enjoyable. Because right now there's literally no point to play the ship over the Yamato. But on the other hand, I don't really want to see another strong overmatching ship in the game. Because now they've broken down the limit that was 460mm. They said at one point, Wargaming straight up said, we will not add any ships that have a larger gun caliber than Yamato's. Yamato caliber was going to be the largest in the game. And they held this rule for a long time, and now Shikishima is going to break that. And now that they've broken this limit, I feel like this might open the floodgates for even more ships. More fantasy ships, regardless of nation. I'm not talking just Soviet fantasy ships, just more Soviet or more fantasy ships that will break down this limit, and soon tier 10 might look the same way as tier 6 and tier 7 battleship battles do, which is everyone overmatches everyone, with the exception of Sinop ignoring it. In this case, we're already seeing a fair bit of that creeping into tier 10. And I'd really, really hope that is not the case. But Shikishima kind of highlights a disturbing trend I've been seeing in World of Warships lately, and that is bigger, 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 regardless of what impact it has. Luckily, in its current state, the ship isn't that good, but looking at lower tiers, or just look at Georgia, Thunder, Ohio. These 3 ships that were released, what, June, September last year, and they basically made cruiser life hell. That's really the easiest way to put it. Any sort of tanky cruiser was no longer tanky when these ships were around. 457s aren't fun. Oh, sorry, Kremlin came out as well, same year. So in 1 year, 30mm armor plating has basically been made irrelevant. And I really hope they're not going to continue that trend and make 32mm armor irrelevant as well. Another big issue is that the more of these overmatching battleships they add, battleships that can't overmatch are obviously being left in the dust, like Kurfürst and Montana. These ships have been around since 2016, and their inability to punch through cruiser armor is now more evident than ever. Game ends though, fairly comfortable win, you could say. Well, actually, that was the opposite of a comfortable win, sorry. I haven't even been paying attention that much to the game. I managed to outlast them and take a ton of pot shots. The reason I included this game was because you got to see a full game of Shikishima gun firepower. These days games tend to be steamrolls one way or another. This game you got to see Shikishima shooting non-stop for almost 20 minutes and draw your own conclusions on what the dispersion is like. Personally, I think there is no point to play the ship or the Yamato in its current state. Hopefully they will tighten up the dispersion for the sake of the ship, but as a design, I hate the addition of more Overmatch. This is not what the game needs. In fact, one of the reasons I really like the Borgonia is because Borgonia only has 380mm guns, and you force it to switch ammo if you angle against it, and that's something I'd like to see more of. Designs like this instead of designs like this point-and-click adventures. 229k damage, only 2 citadels, 73 hits, good average damage per shell, but the game itself felt like a real struggle. 2400 base, our Shokaku did quite well, earning 2.2k behind me, and overall a close game. Detailed report wise, 19 minutes 44 seconds, I tanked 108k damage. Not really too much to talk about. AA damage a fair bit, but once again this is against the tier 8 carrier. Against the tier 10 carrier you will have a significantly harder time. Thank you guys for watching, thank you for tuning in. I hope you guys drop a subscription if you feel like it. I really want to hit that 100k and give you guys a bunch of ships, especially considering how popular the Mines appears to be. I think I will request a lot of them to give away. Sorry about fumbling some words, I'm getting a bit tired. I'll talk to you guys later, have a good one.